Não narrar. Trilha. Música suave e melancólica, com toque de mistério e tensão crescente. I still remember the snap of the camera, not for the flash of light, but for the sharp, stinging pain in my chest. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon, leaves swirling like forgotten dreams around our feet. My son had insisted on a professional family photo shoot. A rare occasion, he'd said, to capture us all together. All of us. Such a hollow phrase, it turned out. Não narrar. Cena. Imagens de outono dourado, lago calmo, talvez a silhueta de uma família ao longe. My name is Eleanor. I'm 72 years old, and up until that day, I believed I knew my place in this family. It wasn't always a central one, but it was a place. A grandmother, a mother, an aunt. A quiet presence, often overlooked, sometimes taken for granted, but a part of the fabric nonetheless. Or so I thought. Não narrar. Trilha. A música fica pouco mais sombria, mas ainda sutil. We gathered by the old oak tree near the lake, the one where my late husband and I used to have picnics with our children. A spot filled with memories, both sweet and bittersweet. Everyone was there. My son, David, his wife, Sarah, my sister-in-law, and their two beaming children, my grandchildren, Emily and Tom. David's sister, my daughter Rebecca, was there too, with her husband Mark and their twin boys. A picture-perfect family, ready for their perfect picture. Não narrar. Cena. Close-up em uma mão trêmula, talvez uma ruga profunda, olhar pensativo. I stood at the edge of the group, a little unsure where to stand, where I fit in this carefully arranged tableau. David, ever the thoughtful one, gestured for me to come closer. "Mom, come on, get in here," he said, his voice warm. A small flutter of hope in my heart. Maybe this time, maybe I wouldn't just be an afterthought. Não narrar. SFX. Sons, suaves do vento. Talvez o clique distante de uma câmera. I took a step forward, a small smile forming on my lips. That's when Sarah, David's wife, stepped in. She's always had a way of making her presence known. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile that rarely reached her eyes when it came to me. She was arranging the children, her voice light and airy, but with an underlying steel. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her tone dripping with a faux sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. "Don't you think you'd be better suited slightly to the side? We want a nice, clean shot of the immediate family, don't we?" Não narrar. Trilha. Breve silêncio na música, como choque. My smile faltered. My heart sank. The immediate family. I was David's mother. I was the matriarch, in spirit, if not always in practice. Was I not immediate enough? David, bless his heart, started to protest. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Mom's family. She should be front and center." But Sarah just gave him a look, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch of her eyebrow, that David, for some reason, always seemed to cower before. "Darling," she purred, turning back to him, "we can get a shot with Eleanor later, a separate one. But for this one, the main one, let's keep it tight. You know, for the mantelpiece." Não narrar. Cena. Uma câmera desfocada ao fundo, o foco na expressão de Sarah e a hesitação de David. My daughter, Rebecca, who usually had a sharp tongue, remained silent. She just looked at her shoes. My twin grandsons, usually so boisterous, seemed to sense the shift in the air and grew quiet. The photographer, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable, just cleared his throat and adjusted his lens, waiting. Não narrar. SFX. Ruídos abafados. De tosse do fotógrafo. O som leve de uma câmera sendo ajustada. I stood there, frozen. It wasn't just the words. It was the gesture. Sarah reached out, her perfectly manicured hand taking my arm, and gently but firmly guided me backward, away from the warm cluster of bodies, away from the laughter that had just been there. She pushed me out, not violently, not with malice that would warrant a scene, just gently, as if I were a piece of furniture that didn't quite fit the aesthetic. There, she said, stepping back, a triumphant glint in her eyes. Perfect! Now narrar, trilha, a música retorna, mais pesada e melancólica. Perfect for her. I could feel the blood drain from my face. My cheeks burned with a shame so intense it felt physical. I looked at David, my son, my own flesh and blood. He met my gaze for a split second, a flicker of apology in his eyes, before he quickly averted them. A weak, embarrassed smile plastered on his face. Rebecca still stared at the ground. No one said a word. The silence was deafening. It echoed in my ears, louder than any shout. Não narrar, cena. Close up nos olhos de Eleanor, cheios de dor e humilhação, mas também uma faísca de algo novo, algo frio. I stood there, just outside the frame, watching my family pose. They smiled, they laughed, they looked like the happiest, most integrated family on earth. And I, Eleanor, was not part of it. I was a prop, discarded, an inconvenience, an embarrassment. Não narrar. Trilha. A música se torna mais determinada, ritmo lento e pesado de decisão. That moment, something inside me shifted. A fragile thread, stretched thin over years of small slights and whispered unkindnesses, finally snapped. It wasn't just this photo. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny humiliations. The way they'd conveniently forgotten my birthday last year, only remembering a week later with a hurried apology. The way Sarah would always forget to include me in family group chats, then act surprised when I missed an event. The way David would listen to her, always, over me, his own mother. Não narrar. Cena. Flashbacks rápidos e borrados de momentos de desconsideração. Grupo de pessoas rindo. Eleanor sozinha ao fundo. Bolo de aniversário sem velas. Uma mensagem de texto ignorada. I remembered how, when my husband passed away 5 years ago, Sarah had immediately started suggesting practical solutions for my big, empty house. She'd wanted me to sell it, move into a smaller apartment. Free up your assets, Eleanor. For your golden years. Of course, she'd meant free up my assets for their golden years. Não narrar. SFX. Susurros abafados e distorcidos, como vozes do passado. This house, the very house my son David and his family lived in now, rent-free, was the house I had secretly bought. Not the one my husband and I lived in for 50 years. No. That house, the family home I had indeed sold years ago. The one they were living in now. The lovely modern 4-bedroom house with the spacious garden Sarah adored. That was my quiet revenge. My secret. Não narrar. Trilha. A música fica mais conspiratória, com toque de inteligência fria. They thought it belonged to David. Or rather, they thought David was paying a mortgage on it. That's what I'd led them to believe. I'd even helped with the down payment, a generous sum that came from the sale of my own family home. For your future, I'd told David, beaming. He and Sarah had been so grateful, or so I thought. They saw me as a source of funds, a helpful old woman who could be gently steered. Não narrar. Cena. Imagens de documentos, sendo discretamente assinados. Envelope sendo selado. Sorriso enigmático no rosto de Eleanor. What they didn't know was that I had used a substantial portion of my late husband's life insurance and my own pension to buy this house outright, in my name, a year before David and Sarah moved in. I'd set up a complex trust with a shell company to hide my ownership, anonymously, discreetly, I had always been good with numbers, with planning, a trait my husband had admired, and it had given me a quiet, almost wicked satisfaction to pull the strings from the shadows. Não narrar, SFX, o som de uma caneta arranhando papel, clique de fechadura talvez? I wasn't doing it out of pure spite then. Not yet. I had genuinely wanted to help David and his family. I wanted them to have a good life, a secure home. I saw it as an investment in their happiness and a way to ensure I'd always have a place with them, a guest room at least. But Sarah's subtle digs, her endless suggestions about my dependence, her constant need to assert her dominance, had slowly curdled that kindness into something harder. Não narrar. Cena. Uma vista da casa da família à noite, com as luzes acesas, contraste com a figura solitária de Eleanor. They thought I was frail, confused, easily manipulated, an old woman whose mind was fading, whose savings were dwindling. They spoke openly in front of me about their plans for their house, renovating the kitchen, building a new deck. I listened, my face impassive, my heart a stone. Não narrar. Thriller, a música acelera, ligeiramente, como tom de suspense. That day, at the photo shoot, as I watched them laugh, completely oblivious to my pain, completely uncaring, a fierce resolve solidified in my soul. I wasn't just old, I was wise. I wasn't fading, I was gathering strength. They had shown me my place. Now, I would show them theirs. Não narrar. Cena. Eleanor virando, as costas para a família na sessão de fotos, seu rosto agora sem tristeza, mas com uma expressão fria e determinada. I walked away from the photo shoot without saying goodbye. No one noticed. No one called out. They were too busy creating their perfect illusion. I went straight home, to my small rented apartment on the other side of town, a place they barely knew existed. My true sanctuary. Não narrar. SFX. Uma porta se fechando suavemente. O som de uma chave virando na fechadura. I sat down at my old desk, the one my husband had made, and pulled out the file. The thick folder, carefully organized, with all the legal documents, the deed, the trust agreements, the eviction notice, already prepared, waiting for the right moment. I had paid a good lawyer a considerable sum to make sure every T was crossed, every I dotted. There would be no loopholes. Não narrar. Cena. Close-up nas mãos de Eleanor, segurando a pasta de documentos. Sorriso quase imperceptível surgindo em seus lábios. The sight of that document, stark white against the dark wood of my desk, filled me not with anger, but with a quiet, icy calm. They had pushed me out. They had made me invisible. They had treated me as if I didn't belong. Não narrar. Trilha. A música se torna mais imponente, uma sensação de poder e controle, mas ainda com uma melancolia subjacente. And now, I would make sure they didn't belong either, not in my house. The eviction notice lay there, ready. The date on it was for 2 months from now. Plenty of time for them to realize what they had lost. Plenty of time for me to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. But first, I had to deliver it. I had to choose the perfect moment. A moment that would make them feel exactly what I had felt today. Public, humiliating, unforgettable. I picked up the phone. I had a call to make to my lawyer. There was one final detail to arrange for the delivery, and then I would wait. Não narrar. Cena. A câmera foca no telefone na mão de Eleanor, o rosto dela em sombra, olhar distante e pensativo. A tensão está no ar. The quiet storm was brewing, and they had no idea. Não narrar. Trilha. A música termina com uma nota de suspense e resolução. Não narrar. Trilha. Melancólica e introspectiva, quase sussurro de dor. The flashbulb still burned behind my eyes, not the bright light of a happy memory, but the searing white heat of utter rejection. My cheek throbbed where her hand had pushed me away. It wasn't a hard shove, not enough to leave a bruise, but the force of it, the intent, had slammed into my very soul. You don't belong, she chirped, a sickly sweet smile plastered on her face for the camera, while her eyes, those cold, dead fish eyes, dared me to argue. And no one had. Not my nephew, her husband, my only remaining blood, not his children, my grandnieces and nephews. They had just shuffled, repositioned themselves, making the gap where I had stood disappear as if I were a ghost. Now nearer. SFX. Distant muffled laughter that quickly fades. I had walked away from that garden, past the perfectly trimmed hedges, the vibrant roses, and the fountain that gurgled like a mockery of peace. Each step was heavy, dragging through a swamp of humiliation. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to be away from them, away from their pitying glances, or worse, their indifferent ones. I found myself on a bench in the local park, the one with the old oak tree where my own children, long gone, used to play. The afternoon sun was warm, but a chill had settled deep in my bones. This wasn't the first time, of course, not by a long shot. It was just the clearest, the most undeniable. For years I had been the family's spare part, the one called only when a babysitter was needed or a meal cooked because my sister-in-law, Brenda, was too busy with her golf lessons. I was the silent extra at Christmas, watching them exchange lavish gifts while I brought a modest casserole. My name was often forgotten in holiday cards or misspelled. My stories, when I dared to share them, were met with blank stares, polite nods, or worse, cut off mid-sentence by Brenda's booming laugh about some trivial celebrity gossip. Não narrar. Trilha. Pequena elevação na música, sugerindo raiva crescente mais contida. But this physical exclusion, this public declaration that I had no place, no value, no right to be part of their perfect family portrait. It ripped open an old wound, one I thought had scarred over. It wasn't just Brenda's cruelty, it was the complicity of silence. My nephew, David, my brother's son, had looked at his shoes. His children, my grandnieces, had looked at their phones. No one had intervened. No one had said, Aunt Eleanor does belong here. The shame burned, hot and suffocating. I closed my eyes, picturing Brenda's smug face. You don't belong. The words echoed. They swirled with other memories. Being told my opinion didn't matter because I didn't understand modern things. Being served a different, smaller portion at Sunday dinner. Being asked to sit in the cramped kitchen while they ate in the spacious dining room. They had chipped away at me, piece by piece, until I felt invisible, a ghost in my own family's life. Now narrar, SFX, suspiro profundo, quasi inaudible. But sitting there, under that old oak, something shifted. A tiny flicker of defiance ignited in the ashes of my despair. Enough. I had given them my time, my meager energy, my love, only to be tossed aside like an unwanted ornament. My life had become a quiet servitude, a pathetic attempt to earn a place that was never truly offered. Then a thought, cold and clear, pierced through the fog of my hurt. The house. Not their house, but the house I was currently living in, the one my sister-in-law treated as her own kingdom, ruling over me with petty demands and constant criticism. It was the house my brother, their father, had built with his own hands, the house he had helped him save for, contributing what I could from my small teacher's salary for years before I even married and moved out. I remember the day he bought the land, how excited he was, how we talked about building a home for our family, a place for all of us. Não narrar. Trilha. A música muda para tom mais determinado, com leve ar de mistério. After my brother passed, then his wife, the house passed to David. Or so I thought. Brenda, David's wife, had been the one to manage everything. She told me they would allow me to stay in the spare room. As a favor, since I was alone after my own husband's passing. I had nowhere else to go. I had sold my own small apartment to cover my late husband's medical bills, thinking I'd be taken care of by family as they promised. Brenda made it sound like an act of charity, a grand gesture. Every chipped paint, every leaky faucet, every broken floorboard became another excuse for her to remind me of her generosity. This is our home, Eleanor. We're letting you stay. That phrase, our home, echoed. But was it? Truly? A tiny seed of doubt had been planted years ago. I remembered snippets of conversations, half-heard phone calls after my brother's death. Brenda always on the phone with lawyers, talking about assets and market value. She was always so secretive. It was just a feeling, a nagging discomfort I had dismissed as my imagination, my grief. Now, that feeling clawed its way back to the surface. What if they hadn't actually inherited it outright? What if Brenda, in her endless scheming, had seen an opportunity? I had no proof, no solid reason, just a gut feeling, fueled by years of her manipulative behavior. Não narrar, cena. Close up, no rosto da narradora, os olhos focados, a testa franzida em concentração. I stood up from the park bench, my legs no longer heavy, but suddenly light with a new, dangerous purpose. I went to the public library. I hadn't used a computer much, but I knew how to ask for help. A kind librarian guided me. I started digging. Property records, old deeds, public databases. My fingers trembled as I typed, my vision blurring at times, but I pushed through. Hour after hour, I searched. Days turned into weeks. It wasn't easy. Brenda had been clever. She'd put the house on the market years ago, quietly, after my brother's death, claiming it was for estate planning purposes, but keeping the listing private among a select group of real estate agents. Then she'd bought it back herself, under a shell corporation, a limited liability company, making it seem as if it were a new, separate entity, completely detached from the family's direct ownership. She owned the LLC. This way, she controlled everything. She hadn't even told David, her husband, the full truth I suspected. She had simply managed the family assets, as she called it, making herself indispensable and unaccountable. Não narrar. Cefches, sons suaves de teclado, uma máquina registradora antiga, talvez o virar de páginas. My pension, my meager savings from a lifetime of teaching, and my late husband's small annuity sat in a bank account I'd rarely touched, mostly out of fear. Fear of being a burden, fear of running out. But now, that fear was replaced by a cold resolve. I found a lawyer, a small-town man, quiet and astute, recommended by an old friend from the book club. He listened to my rambling story, asked precise questions, and saw the glimmer of truth in my suspicions. "It's complicated, Eleanor," he'd said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "But not impossible. The LLC structure means she owns it. But if she's willing to sell, or if you can find a way to make her sell." It took months of secret phone calls from the library, of hushed meetings in the lawyer's dusty office. I learned about offers, counter-offers, legal loopholes. I had to be careful. Brenda was sharp, and if she suspected anything, she'd shut me down. My lawyer found an opening. The LLC had taken on a new loan recently for an investment Brenda had made that was failing. She was in deeper than she let on, needing quick capital. The house was listed, very quietly, as a potential asset to offload if needed. Não narrar. Trilha. A música se torna mais urgente, mas ainda com toque de sigilo. It felt like a spy mission. Every interaction with Brenda became a performance. I was the docile, grateful aunt, nodding, smiling, asking innocent questions about her financial endeavors. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, my lawyer was working. He made an anonymous offer through another shell company, higher than anyone else would dare, but still within my means. My life savings, every last penny went into that offer. It was terrifying, exhilarating, a gamble on my dignity. One rainy Tuesday, a plain envelope arrived at my lawyer's office. He called me immediately. Eleanor, he said, his voice surprisingly soft. It's done. The transfer is complete. You own the house. Now narrar. Es fix, ozom de un selo, carimbando un documento. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand. The house, my brother's house, Brenda's fortress. It was mine. My heart pounded, not with joy, but with a quiet, fierce triumph. Brenda had unknowingly sold her kingdom to the very person she had cast out. She had no idea at all. She still treated me as the meek aunt living in her spare room, still told me to clean up that mess or don't touch the thermostat. She still thought she was the queen of the castle, but I was the owner. I had the deed, and I had a plan, a cold, clear plan. It needed to be perfect, not just for me, but for every slight, every forgotten birthday, every dismissive glance. The family photo shoot was the catalyst. It pushed me to act. And now, the opportunity for justice was within my grasp. I just needed the right moment. A moment that would make Brenda's perfect, carefully constructed world crumble. And I knew exactly when that moment would be. Very, very soon. Não narrar. Trilha. A música termina com uma nota de suspense e quietude, um segredo prestes a ser revelado. Não narrar. Trilha. Melancólica, com tom de determinação crescente. The old blueprints felt heavy in my shaking hands. Not for the house they lived in, not the one Sarah and Mark had so carelessly claimed, but for my future. A future I was determined to build, brick by painful brick. I folded them back into the worn leather brief I'd carried since my husband passed. A brief that held more than just papers. It held my quiet defiance. I had spent weeks, months even, researching. Not openly, of course. My visits to the local library became clandestine missions. I learned to navigate online forums, to use a public computer without leaving a trace. I called real estate agents from a borrowed phone, using a voice I barely recognized as my own. A firm, steady tone, not the timid whisper they were used to hearing. The house, the one they called the family home, was actually quite old. My parents had lived there. I had grown up within those walls. After their passing, it was supposed to be a shared inheritance. But Sarah, with her booming voice and aggressive spirit, had simply moved in with Mark, declaring it the most practical solution. They were younger, had 2 children, and needed the space. I, a widow living alone, apparently did not. I had protested weakly at first. My voice had always been small against Sarah's tidal wave. But what about my share? I'd asked, my throat tight. She'd laughed. Your share, Agnes? What would you do with a house this size? It's a money pit. We're doing you a favor by taking it off your hands. We'll cover the taxes, the repairs. You're welcome. The years that followed were filled with her subtle jabs, her casual dismissals. Every time I visited, she'd point out a broken faucet, a leaky roof, sighing dramatically. Another expense for us, Agnes. Good thing you don't have to worry about these things. She made me feel like a burden, a spectator in my own life story, living off their generosity. Now narrar, SFX. Sons de teclas de computador, suaves, click de mouse. But I had secrets too, small, dusty ones, tucked away like forgotten heirlooms. My husband, God rest his soul, had been a cautious man. He had insisted on a small separate savings account for a rainy day, Agnes. You never know. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something. And then the letter. An old investment, a forgotten share in a modest company, had matured far beyond what we'd ever imagined. It wasn't enough to buy a mansion, but it was enough to buy that house. The house they thought was theirs. The first lawyer I spoke to was skeptical. You want to buy a house that your family already occupies? A house you technically have a partial claim to already? His voice was dry, professional. It could be messy, Mrs. Henderson. I met his gaze squarely. Messy is what my life has been, counsel. I want what's mine, fair and square. He started making calls. Discreetly, he assured me, under a different name, a holding company, anything to keep my involvement hidden. I was a ghost in the transaction. It was a dance of subterfuge and paperwork, a quiet battle fought on legal documents instead of shouting matches. Each form I signed, each check I wrote, felt like a small victory, a tiny piece of my soul returning. The hardest part was the waiting. The weeks stretched into months. Sarah would complain about the heating bill, about the cost of repainting a room. "It's draining us dry, Agnes," she'd whine over the phone. I'd listen, nodding into the receiver, offering bland commiseration. Inside, a cold fire burned. Each complaint was a drop of fuel. Now narrar. Trila. Tom mais sombrio e determinado começa a surgir. I found myself walking past the house more often. Not too close, not too obviously, just a stroll, observing. The garden I had tended for years was overgrown. The porch swing my father had built was broken. A pang of sadness, then a surge of purpose. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming a legacy, a piece of myself. The real estate agent, a kind young woman named Emily, became my confidant. She knew the secret, knew the unusual circumstances. She would call me with updates, her voice hushed, almost conspiratorial. "The offer has been accepted, Mrs. Henderson. We're moving to closing." My heart would pound. I'd hang up and just sit in silence, trying to process the enormity of it all. I practiced what I would say, not aloud, but in the quiet chambers of my mind. The words took shape, firm and unyielding. I imagined Sarah's face, her disbelief, her rage. I tried to prepare myself for it. I told myself I wouldn't waver. Not this time. There was a moment, late one night, when doubt crept in. Was this truly the right thing to do? To throw my own family out? The thought brought a wave of nausea. But then I remembered the photo shoot, the push. "You don't belong." The sting of those words, the humiliation, and the countless slights before that. The ignored birthdays, the forgotten holidays, the way they talked over me as if my opinions were transparent. This wasn't just about a house. It was about belonging, about finally having a place, a voice, a presence that couldn't be erased. Now narrar. Esefse, som distante, desino de greja o relógio. The final paperwork arrived. A thick envelope, innocent looking, but within its pages lay the transfer of ownership. The house, Auntie's their house, was legally mine. The solicitor's voice was clear, crisp. "Congratulations, Mrs. Henderson. The property is now officially in your name." He then outlined the eviction process, the legal steps. It was all very cold, very procedural. I held the official deed, the key to their entire lives, in my trembling hand. It was a heavy burden, a powerful weapon. I had done it. I had bought the family home. They still lived in it. oblivious, laughing, bickering, believing themselves secure. They wouldn't suspect a thing until the day I decided to reveal my secret. And that day was coming. Very, very soon. I knew exactly when and where I would deliver the final blow. I just had to decide if I could truly go through with it. Now Nearer. Thriller. Suspense building. Low hum. The deed was done. The papers signed. The house, my house, was finally mine. The knowledge sat heavy in my chest, a cold, hard stone of victory. It didn't feel like joy, not yet. It felt like purpose. Every quiet evening, I'd review the documents, the purchase agreement, the transfer of ownership, and the eviction notice, printed clearly, dated, signed by me. Now Narrower. Saina. Close-up of hands reviewing legal documents, then gently placing them in an envelope. I watched them. From my little corner in what they still thought was their home, I watched them. My sister-in-law, Martha especially, she'd sweep through the living room, complaining about dust I couldn't reach, about bills I couldn't pay. She spoke of her plans for the house, casually, as if I were a ghost already. "This wall needs to come down, David," she'd tell my nephew, completely ignoring me, perched on the worn armchair. Now Narar, SFX, distant muffled voices, a slight clatter of dishes. I'd just nod, a small polite nod, but inside, a different conversation was happening. Soon, Martha, soon. My revenge wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was silent, meticulous, like weaving a net in the dark. The final piece of their arrogance fell into place a few weeks later. A family legacy photo shoot. Martha's idea, of course, for the grandchildren's album. Our original house, she insisted, was the perfect backdrop. The grand staircase, the sunny garden, the very spaces she deemed too small, too old, for me. Now Narar, Sina, a family portrait scene being set up in a grand living room. Props, lights, camera. I received the text message. "Grandma, don't forget the family photo shoot this Saturday. Wear something nice. See you at 2 p.m. sharp." It was from my granddaughter, bless her heart, but I knew Martha had dictated it. Another public performance of familial unity, designed to include me just enough to appear gracious, but not enough to matter. I spent the week preparing, not for the photos, but for the moment after. The envelope. It was always in my thoughts, tucked away, crisp and waiting. I even practiced my calm face in the mirror. No trembling, no tears, just a quiet resolve. Saturday arrived, bright and deceptively cheerful. The house was bustling with activity. Martha, in a flowy dress, directed everyone. "David, stand there. Kids, line up." "No, not you, Aunt Agnes. We need the core family first." Now Nara. SFX. Camera clicks, murmurs, Martha's slightly sharp voice. I wore my best dress, the one I hadn't worn since my husband's funeral. I felt a pang, a memory of happier times in this very house, but I pushed it down. This day was not for nostalgia, it was for reckoning. The photographer, a young man with a polite but harried expression, tried to arrange everyone on the wide, curved staircase. Martha's family, her husband, her 2 children, and their spouses. Then my other nephew, Robert, and his wife, a big, sprawling group. They looked like they belonged, framed by the old oak banister. Now, Narar. Sina, family posing on a staircase, Martha at the center, directing with hand gestures. I stood at the edge, a little apart, as usual, waiting my turn, or waiting to be told where to stand. The photographer glanced at me, a silent question in his eyes. He seemed unsure if I was part of the main group. "All right, everyone," the photographer began. "Let's try a few shots. Big smiles." Martha stepped forward, her smile fixed, her voice dropping a little, but still carrying. "Oh no, Aunt Agnes. Not in this one. This is for the main family, the direct line, the legacy. She waved her hand dismissively, a subtle shooing motion. Maybe we can get you in a separate shot later, with the extended family. Now Narar. SFX. A noticeable silence in the room. Discomfort. My heart, which I thought had hardened into stone, gave a painful lurch. The direct line. The legacy. As if my husband, her husband's brother, meant nothing. As if I, his wife for 50 years, meant less than nothing. The words hung in the air. A public amputation. My granddaughter Emily started to say something. But Grandma, you are the legacy. But Martha shot her a look that silenced. I felt the eyes of my family on me. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others, like Martha, held a faint smirk. It was humiliation, plain and simple, physical exclusion, a public declaration that I didn't belong in their family portrait, in their life. Now Nara, Sina, close up on the elder's face, calm exterior, but a flicker of pain in the eyes, quickly replaced by resolve. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I had anticipated, dreaded, and planned for. The cold logic of my decision solidified. There would be no separate shot. There would be no later. There would only be now. Martha, I said, my voice surprisingly clear, cutting through the murmuring. Everyone turned. My voice was usually so quiet, so easily ignored. She gave a patronizing smile. Yes, Aunt Agnes. Did you want to sit down? You look a bit pale. No, I replied. I just have something for you. Now, Nara. Triller. Music subtly intensifies, a feeling of impending change. I reached into my handbag. It was a simple, sturdy bag, not a fancy one. My hand closed around the envelope. The paper felt heavy, substantial. Each crease, each corner, a testament to months of secret work. I pulled it out, white, official looking. I walked slowly towards her, past my shocked grandchildren, past the confused photographer. Martha's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. What is this, Aunt Agnes? She asked, her tone already sharp. Is it a recipe? This isn't really the time. Now, Narar. Sina. Elder walks purposefully towards Martha, holding the envelope. I extended the envelope, holding it out to her. My hand was steady. Her eyes scanned the document, still held by my fingertips. Her brow furrowed. Eviction notice, she read aloud, her voice a whisper of disbelief. Then her gaze snapped to mine, wild and disbelieving. What is this? What are you talking about? It's an eviction notice, Martha, I repeated, my voice calm, almost serene. For this house, the house you're standing in, the house you call home. Now, Narar. SFX. A sharp gasp from the crowd, followed by stunned silence. The photographer lowered his camera. The children stared. My nephews and nieces looked utterly bewildered. Martha's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Confusion, anger, then a flash of terror. This is ridiculous, she spat, but her voice cracked. This is our home, my husband's inheritance. No, Martha, I said, my voice rising just enough to carry to everyone present. It isn't. Not anymore. I bought it. Now, Narar. Sina, wide shot of the family, their faces a mixture of shock and horror as the elder stands firm. A collective gasp swept through the room. A murmur began to grow, then erupted into confused questions. What? Bought it? Grandma. The house went up for sale quietly, you see, I continued, addressing not just Martha, but everyone. The bank was very discreet. Your uncle, bless his soul, had debts you didn't know about, debts that were tied to the house. When he passed, the bank was patient, but eventually it had to be sold. I just bought it before anyone else could. Martha's face was scarlet. You bought our house? How? With what money? With my money, Martha, I said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. The money you all thought I didn't have. The money my husband and I saved quietly for a rainy day, and that rainy day, it seems, has arrived. Now Nara, thriller, ominous dramatic music swells. I held her gaze. You have 30 days to vacate the premises, Martha. The notice is legally binding. And yes, it was served on purpose. Right here, right now. Because you said I didn't belong. And you were right. I don't belong in your family. But this house is mine. The photographer, clearly uncomfortable, made a move to pack up his equipment. The family erupted. Accusations, disbelief, cries of, "How could you?" And "This is cruel." Martha stood frozen, the eviction notice clutched in her hand, her mouth agape. Now, Nara. Sina. Focus on Martha's face, a mask of dawning horror. Elder stands calm and resolute. But I felt no cruelty, only a profound, aching sense of justice. They had pushed me out of their picture, out of their lives, without a second thought. Now I was pushing them out of their home, with every legal right. The shock on their faces was a bitter meal, but I had earned it. The quiet planning, the long nights, the lonely resolve. It all led to this. The family photo shoot was officially over. The real story had just begun. Não narrar. Trilha. Tensão inicial. Depois transição para a melancolia e finalmente esperança. The paper, still crisp from the printer, fluttered slightly in Stella's trembling hand. Her face, usually a mask of smug assurance, contorted into a grotesque mosaic of disbelief and fury. Richard stood frozen, a deer in the headlights, his mouth agape, utterly speechless. The camera flash from the photographer hung in the air, a phantom echo of the perfect family portrait that would never be. "This is a joke," Stella spat, her voice tight, barely a whisper. A cruel, disgusting joke. Now narrar. SFX. Susurros abafados ao fundo. My nieces and nephews, who had been giggling moments before, now stared wide-eyed, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The photographer, a young woman who looked utterly out of her depth, lowered her camera, her smile dissolving. "It's no joke, Stella," I said, my voice steady, clearer than it had been in years. "It's an eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate my property." "Your property?" she shrieked, finding her voice, a sudden piercing sound that cut through the silence. "This is our home. It's Richard's inheritance, his parents' home." "It was their home," I corrected, a quiet strength blooming in my chest. "After they passed, Richard, in his infinite wisdom, decided to sell it. To me. He signed the papers last year." Now narrar. Cena. Close up. No rosto da Stella, depois no meu. Calmo e firme. Richard finally stirred, a groan escaping his lips. "Why, Mary? Why would you do this?" His eyes pleaded, filled with a confusion that was almost pitiable. He looked at me, then at Stella, as if caught between two immovable forces. "Why?" I echoed, the word tasting like ashes on my tongue. "You ask me why, Richard? After everything? After you let Stella treat me like a stray dog? After you stood by while I was belittled, ignored, cast aside? After this very moment, when your wife physically shoved me out of a family photo, claiming I didn't belong?" The words hung heavy in the air, each one a hammer blow. Stella's face was now crimson, a vein throbbing visibly in her temple. You tricked us. You bought the house behind our backs." "I bought a house that was legally put up for sale," I stated simply. "A house that you and Richard were so eager to get rid of, to downsize, to simplify your lives. You wanted the money. I wanted a home. We both got what we wanted. The difference is, I paid fair market value, something you conveniently forgot to mention when you were discussing your financial difficulties over Sunday dinner. Não narrar. Trilha começa a se intensificar ligeiramente, com tom de drama. The shock registered on their faces. They had no idea I knew about their real financial struggles. The debt Stella had accrued with her extravagant tastes. Richard had confided in me years ago during a weak moment, but I had played along, letting them believe I was oblivious. It was part of my quiet planning. 30 days, Stella, I repeated, holding her gaze. The lawyer will be in touch tomorrow to finalize the details. I suggest you start looking for a new place. And no, you won't be staying with me. Her jaw dropped. The carefully constructed facade of their perfect family life shattered, exposing the raw, ugly truth beneath. She began to sputter, threats mingling with pleas, but I simply turned and walked away, leaving her to grapple with the seismic shift I had just unleashed. Não narrar, Sina, eu me afasto, deixando-os para trás no jardim. The next 30 days were a strange, silent dance of resentment and quiet, agonizing compliance. Stella tried every trick in the book. She called. She threatened legal action. She tried to invoke pity. She even sent Richard to reason with me. Mary, please, he'd whispered over the phone, his voice strained. Where will we go? Stella, she's not taking this well. That's her problem, Richard. Not mine, I replied, my resolve unwavering. She made her bed. Now she has to lie in it. And so do you, for letting her. I offered you a home, a true home, for years. You chose to make me feel unwelcome in it. Now you have to find your own. Now, narrar. SFX. Sons de embalagens e caixas abafados. I kept my distance, staying with an old friend from my book club, only returning to the house to monitor the process, to ensure they were packing and not trying to pull any last-minute stunts. The atmosphere in the house was thick with unspoken anger, regret, and the acrid smell of mothballs as they unearthed forgotten belongings from the attic. I watched them from a distance through the windows. Stella, with her designer clothes now covered in dust, furiously taping boxes. Richard looking smaller, older, his shoulders slumped as he carried armloads of forgotten memories. The children, bewildered, playing amidst the chaos, their innocence jarring against the heavy adult emotions. It wasn't victory I felt, not purely. There was a pang, a ghost of a wish for what might have been, a family that loved and respected each other. But that dream had died a long time ago, suffocated by neglect and entitlement. What I felt now was justice, a quiet, profound sense of equilibrium. Não narrar. Trilha. Música se torna mais melancólica, contemplativa. The morning of the 30th day dawned grey and drizzly. The moving trucks arrived early, their large frames casting long shadows over the manicured lawn I had so lovingly tended for decades. I stood across the street, in my friend's living room, sipping tea, watching the final act unfold. I saw Stella emerge, her face blotchy and swollen, not from tears of sorrow, but from frustrated rage. She yelled at the movers, at Richard, at the world. She cast venomous glances at the house, at the front door, where I had presented her with the notice. And then her eyes swept across the street, meeting mine for a fleeting second. There was no apology, no remorse, only burning hatred. I met her gaze, unflinching, my expression calm. She was powerless now. Her reign of petty tyranny was over. Não narrar. Cena. Stella me vê da rua, sua expressão de raiva. Richard, on the other hand, avoided my eyes. He climbed into the passenger seat of their overloaded car, his head down. He drove away without a backward glance, leaving behind an empty shell of a house and a lifetime of broken promises. Now narrar. SFX. Motor de carro se afastando. Silencio. I waited until the last truck pulled away, until the street was silent again, save for the distant chirping of birds. Then, slowly, I walked across the street, a new set of keys heavy in my hand. The door, once so familiar, felt different now. It was truly mine. Now narrar. Cena. Eu abro a porta e entro na casa vazia. The house was empty. The echoes of their hurried departure still seemed to cling to the walls. Bare patches on the wallpaper marked where paintings had hung. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight, piercing through the windows. Every room, a canvas wiped clean. I walked through the living room, where Stella had held her lavish parties, where I had often felt like an unwelcome guest hiding in a corner. I walked into the kitchen, where my own mother had baked cookies, and where Stella had complained about my cooking. I walked upstairs to my old bedroom, which had become a glorified storage closet for them. Now narrar. Trilha. Música se suaviza, tornando-se mais serena e esperançosa. It was quiet, beautifully, profoundly quiet. A silence that wasn't empty but full, full of possibility, full of peace. I sat on the bare floor in the middle of the living room, just breathing. The weight that had settled on my chest for years, the subtle oppression of being constantly undervalued, of having to fight for my place, slowly, gently, lifted. This wasn't just a house. It was my sanctuary, my fortress, a testament to my own quiet strength. I had spent years planning this, learning, saving, observing, and now it was real. Now narrar. Cena. Eu sentada no chão da sala vazia, sorrindo suavemente. The sun began to set, painting the empty rooms in hues of orange and purple. I looked out the window, at the garden I would reclaim, at the neighborhood I knew so well. I was finally home. Truly, completely home. I thought about what I would do with this house. Perhaps I would open it up to others, to friends who also sought a quiet space, a place to belong. Maybe I'd start a community garden. Or maybe, for a while, I would simply enjoy the solitude, the peace, the sweet, sweet taste of dignity restored. My journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The new chapter had started in the quiet embrace of a home that was finally, unequivocally, mine. Não narrar. Trilha. Música atinge pico de esperança e resolução. Depois suaviza para o CTA. This story, my story, is just one example of how life can surprise you, even in your later years. How sometimes the quietest actions can lead to the most profound changes. It's about finding your voice, even when you feel like you've been silenced, and reclaiming what's rightfully yours. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked or mistreated, I truly hope it brought you a glimmer of hope. I would be so grateful if you would consider giving this video a like. It helps more people find these stories, these whispers of resilience. And please, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a difficult family situation? How did you find your strength? I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear more stories of everyday heroes finding their justice, please subscribe to the channel. Let's build a community where every elder's voice is heard and valued. Thank you for listening.